Hi, this is an update for the desire paths in my game. The idea that when you step on the grass it becomes dirt over time, and that paths kind of emerge. This is an idea that I've become a little bit fixated on since my 2019 Godot game experiments. And in the old game, I just had little lines and dots that would change color when you step near them, and I had to use an octree to segment out the different blades of grass. But that was really cool, but one thing that was really missing from that was the ability to change the underlying texture of the surface. And what I've done recently is made it so that you can change the underlying texture by running on it. And what I showed off previously in an older video, the way I accomplished it was to pass an image into the shader, and each pixel in the image represented a cubic meter in space, each one having a value between 0 and 255. But it was extremely wasteful because the space above her, for example, there would be a value assigned to that location, even though there was no grass there. So the image, the size of the image was pretty big. I guess it was not that big yet. It was 1,000 by 1,000 for this level, but this level is not even done. It's just, this is the beginning of the level, and I feel like it's gonna be, my plan for this level was to make it 5 times bigger than it is now. So it wasn't really going to scale that well, and it was just too much wasted space. And I looked into other things, like how did they do the ink in Splatoon, for example, because that is pretty high resolution and it can be splattered all over any surface. And I saw some different discussions, and one thing that came to mind was to actually just use vertex color and make sure that the surfaces are properly subdivided to be fine enough to have enough detail. And one benefit of using vertex color is that the data, the amount of data stored is proportional to the amount of grass that there is, I guess. So that is kind of good, but there's a few downsides. One is that in Blender I have to actually I have to subdivide up this surface, and I've done that, and here's the debug view. So in this debug view, the purple lines are different nodes in the octree, and then the little green lines on the ground represent actual vertices. So you can see there's a little triangle here, there's going to be a triangle here, there's going to be a triangle here. And so it adds a lot of geometry, but I can store vertex color there, and then I don't have to pass in that image. But the way I created this grid was to knife project from the sky in Blender down onto my surface. And it actually took around 8 minutes on my computer to cut this surface up, and it didn't quite, on the border here, there's only one vertex here, and then one vertex here, and that makes a ton of triangles that are really thin and long. So there's sort of problems. And if I, for example, if I make this, ignore that stupid shaking, that stupid move and slide physics in Godot are still bad, but so look, I made this vertex dark, and it ended up spreading dirt all the way along this wall because these are all connected. And so there's weird artifacts like that. And to me it seems like there's two options. One is that you store it as vertex color and you subdivide the grass itself. The other way is to send an image into the shader that represents points in space, but that ends up being super wasteful. And I've had a discussion with someone about using like hash tables and trying to, I don't know if there's like a good way to not have to actually subdivide the surface, but still allow the dirt paths to exist in a higher quality. And these dirt paths are higher quality than the ones I had before. The ones I had in the image before were a cubic meter, and you can see these are subdivided more finely, and I have like control over it. So if I make like kind of curved paths by running on the same curve for a long enough time, then you'll see that the resolution is kind of high enough to make it look decent. Like it looks like a circle, mostly. Whereas before you could really tell the difference between like a square meter. Like this looks like, I don't know, this might be like twice as much detail. It's hard for me to judge it, but I think I subdivided it about like twice as fine. And it's overall less data because I'm not storing like empty nothingness up in the sky. But the actual method of creating this subdivision is kind of annoying. So if I open Blender, it's sort of like this. It's like, here's a grid. This is actually a much lower resolution grid. The one I actually used in that example was much more finely detailed. But I knife project it down onto the surface, and then the surface gets cut. But like I said, there's still issues. If I go back into Godot, you can see okay, so here are the actual triangles that came through, and you can see in the edges, the walls, like there's some severe problems. I mean, I'm not really sure how I want to do this. Like, the idea is that you want a uniform distribution of points, and you want that to interact nicely with the points that are necessary to create the shape of the ground that I want. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It doesn't play that well or that nicely. And what you're actually seeing is the collision shape. So I actually have way more collision triangles than are necessary, because this is just like a giant plane, and having all these collision triangles is pretty pointless. I just need the actual mesh to be subdivided up. I mean, I could create a separate collider mesh that doesn't have all the cuts in it, and maybe that's something that could work. But the act of actually cutting this is kind of annoying. It's like, it doesn't work too well on these like edges where the wall is. Manually cutting it myself as I'm creating it seems, I don't know, maybe it's doable, it just also seems kind of irritating. It also ended up like cutting this wall for no reason. Like it didn't really need, I don't really need this to be cut finally. Like all these cuts are just not necessary at all. I really just want to cut the grass surface. So it's like sort of like a workflow problem, trying to figure out if I'm creating a level with grass and I want the grass to be dynamic, how do I structure that, and how do I make the workflow work well? If anyone has any ideas on how to maybe improve this technique, let me know. That's pretty much it, so I'm gonna end the video.